Hello and welcome to a new edition of True Audio Files, where today we're going to be doing a sound quality shootout for Van Halen's first self-titled album. And main reason why I'm doing this is you probably already know, because if you don't, then you've been probably living under a rock or you don't follow vinyl news at all. But the first Van Halen album has been released as a one-step by Mobile Fidelity, and I got that this week, which this is it right here. And I got number 1347. Looks like there's going to be about 12,000 of them printed. So I did a shootout with 3 other versions of it, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a little more detail in a bit. But basically what I have for other versions that I wanted to compare is I have I believe it's a first pressing Japanese pressing. And I also have, it's a 2009, I believe it is, reissue that was pressed at RTI, but they used the stampers, so the original metalwork from the DCC version of this release, which was done by Stephen Hoffman was the mastering engineer, and Kevin Gray actually cut it. So this one, by all standards, from everything I have heard from other people out there, when this was first reissued, was considered by far the best version of it out there. That's from everything I have heard. So take that for what it is, but that's kind of what I'd heard. And another version that I have is, it's basically, I think it's a first or at least an early Columbia House club pressing of this album as well. So all of them are in great shape. I have heard that the 2015 version, which was cut by Chris Bellman, cut from the original analog master tapes, is really, really good. And some people think actually that it is the best one prior to the one-step coming out. So we'll talk about the one-step here in a second. But I didn't get it, and part of it was because I already had 3 other versions, and I had heard again about the DCC/2009 reissue being by far the best out there, and I had actually heard the digital remaster from that same time period, the 2015 digital remaster versus the earlier masterings, and at least the digital version didn't really sound better. As a matter of fact, I actually preferred the earlier digital mastering. So I kind of decided to skip that one. I have now since, just so you'll know, decided to go ahead and purchase it because they are still available. And it's not going to come until probably a couple weeks from now. So I'll probably do an update on this to let you know what my thoughts are on that one versus all these other ones. But suffice to say, there's probably more to come. Or not probably, there will be. All right, so basically I listened to the one-step all the way through. I thought it sounded really, really good. Super quiet, which is to be expected from the super vinyl material that they use from the vinyl material that they use for the one-steps. Great, deep, powerful bass. Good quality highs. Definitely, for those who don't like a lot of highs, this probably has more than what you may be wanting, but I liked the amount of treble that was on it. But overall, I thought it sounded really good all across the board. Great sound stage to it in all directions. You know, depth, width, and a little bit of height as well. Good separation between the instruments. So then I tried the Hoffman version, the 2009 version anyways, pressed at RTI. Sounded very good. Sounded different though. Definitely different. The bass was punchier, even though I think that the one-step probably had a little bit deeper bass. The Hoffman had more probably mid-bass to it, so it kind of had that kick you in the chest type of bass to it, where you're kind of just feeling the bass more so on the Mobile Fidelity one, and definitely did not have as much high on it. There was a decent amount of high note to it, and I guess you might be able to argue that maybe the cymbals and maybe the voice sounded maybe a little bit more natural to some, but I don't always like natural necessarily. But for those of you who don't like a lot of treble in your recordings, you will probably prefer this one over the one step, anyways. But overall, it definitely sounded really good. But definitely didn't have the soundstage width that the Mobile Fidelity had. The depth was probably pretty similar. There was definitely more separation between the instruments on the Mobile Fidelity one. So then I listened to the Japanese pressing, and it definitely sounded different. Had decent bass, had a lot more upper mid range to it, and I think so much so to the point where it could almost be considered a little bit on the harsh side. If you had it cranked up, it's definitely going to feel that way, probably. At least it did on my system. Your system may vary. It was super quiet, as Japanese pressings usually are. Definitely as quiet, I would say, as the super vinyl one step. And overall, still, I think it sounded really good. The one odd thing that I found about it, though, is that I basically tested running with the devil on all of these, just to let you know. I did the A/B between running with the devil on all of these different versions. The one thing that I did notice on the Japanese, which was kind of odd, and it was kind of, I don't want to say off-putting, but it just kind of threw me a little bit, was at the beginning, it's, for lack of a better term, it almost sounds like a car horn that kind of fades in. And that, to me, was really strange on the Japanese, in the sense that it kind of started in the right speaker and then came in on the left, where all the other versions kind of started on the left speaker and came in on the right later. And then the vocals were definitely a little bit right of center on the Japanese pressing too, which I thought was kind of odd, and where it wasn't the case with all the other ones. It was dead center. So that was kind of odd to me. It was a little bit disorientating, because it didn't sound the same, like the same mix as the other one. So take that for what it's worth, but still sounded very good, and pretty hard to beat it, especially in terms of how quiet it was. It's definitely as quiet, like I said, as the Super Vinyl, probably a little bit quieter than the RTI version. Then I put the club pressing on, and quite frankly, the club pressing sounded pretty close to the Japanese pressing. It still had the centered vocals, so in that respect it was different, but it was pretty close to the Japanese pressing. I would say maybe the difference would be is it may have been a touch brighter, which is kind of odd, and I mean that by the higher frequencies, not the mid highs that I was talking about that made the Japanese pressing sound a little harsh. But that one still kind of had that harsh vibe to it if you cranked it up, but still, it's, I would say, for a club pressing, and I'm not hugely a fan of club pressings. Sometimes you hit it out of the park, and sometimes they use the same stampers and everything, but I have to say that this one sounded pretty good. But, if I had to kind of rate all of them in terms of sound quality, if you're wanting kind of a, more, I don't want to it's hard to say, because none of them stick out as being like neutral. The Hoffman definitely is not going to be, if you're not going to be as bright as all the other ones. So if you don't like the brightness of any of the other versions I've talked about here, then the Hoffman definitely be the one for you. That is, if you don't mind a little bit more bass, because the mid bass is definitely more prominent there. So I personally really like that a lot, and I would say that I would have liked that to be a little bit more prominent, at least a little bit more prominent in all the other versions, including the one step. But the one step still had great bass. Although the one bizarre thing is that I did notice that on some tracks, the bass drum, most specifically, wasn't as prominent as it was on others. And I think, if I remember correctly, Jamie's Crying was one that stood out to me as not having as much oomph, or the bass drum didn't seem to be quite as loud as it was on some of the other tracks. So, so if I had to nitpick on something like that, that would be the one thing I would nitpick on the one step. But, it sounded really good. As far as I can say, for the pressings I have right now, it's definitely the winner, and I will definitely have to check out the Chris Bellman version and see what I think about it in comparison to that one, and see if I feel it's better. The rumblings around say that it's still better than the Chris Bellman cut. So take that for what it's worth. If you've been watching a lot of these videos, maybe you've come across that same opinion that the Chris Bellman one is very good, but the One Step is better. From everything I have heard and everything I've heard personally, literally, and heard from other people, it sounds like the One Step is definitely the best if you don't mind spending that money. So, having said that, it is still really expensive. It's $125 because it's a 2 LP 45 RPM set, where the Chris Bellman one you can get for like $25 on Amazon. So, if you're wanting the best value, best bang for your buck, by far is going to be the Chris Bellman cut. And the Japanese pressing is probably going to be your next best value. And that's probably going to sound the closest to what it originally sounded like when it first came out on record back in the late 70s. So if you're kind of wanting that most authentic sound from the original issue, the Japanese pressing would be the one for you. But I mean, if you're talking just pure, money, take that off the table. At least from what I've heard and what I've listened to right now, I would definitely say that the One Step is your go-to piece, and you should grab one if you're wanting just the absolute best sounding version of it. Especially if you really enjoy listening to things in the sweet spot of your system. So, you got that, like I said, the depth, sound stage width, sound stage height, the separation of the instruments, all that stuff is going to be better than all of the other versions of it. I would say the only potential drawbacks would be, the EQ. You may not prefer that one over the other ones, and the fact that you have to get up a couple more times because it's a 45 RPM and it's a 2-record set. So anyway, that's what I have to say about that. I'd like to hear what you think. Have you listened to all of these or some of these? Do you have the Chris Bellman, and have you compared it to the One Step? And maybe even against the Steve Hoffman one as well. I'd love to hear your take on that if you do. But anyway, that is everything. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Love to hear your comments in the comments section. I want to thank you for being a subscriber if you are one. If you're not, please subscribe. I'd love to see you subscribe. Hit that like button if you liked this video. And if you want to know when my new videos come out, hit that alert bell as well. So, all right, that is it. Thank you very much. You guys have yourselves a great rest of your day, great rest of your week. Thank you very much.